I am Felix Harcourt. I am a historian. What does that mean, other than making me the absolute best person to talk to at parties? I do not appreciate the amount of laughs that got. What it means to me is that when I look at the world around us, I think about what our history can tell us about how we got to where we are and what possibilities it suggests for how we might move forward. And when I look at the world around us today, one of the biggest issues I see is the prevalence of racist beliefs. Now, you don't need a historian to tell you that racism is nothing new. But the disturbing trend over the last few years in the rise of popularity, or at least of visibility, of individuals and groups that espouse overt philosophies of hate, that's a real problem. It's not a problem we're going to solve today, right? I'm not going to solve racism in the next 15 minutes, I'm sorry. I wish I had all the answers. But we can at least start to think about part of that problem. How the media covers those hate groups in ways in which it can make the problem worse. This has been an increasing subject of concern, particularly since the violence in Charlottesville in 2017, following which the kind of coverage that media outlets from NPR to the New York Times gave to these groups, and particularly to leaders of the self-proclaimed alt-right, met with a wave of well-deserved criticism. That's a criticism that's only sharpened with the continuing acts of violence, like the mass shooting in a grocery store in Buffalo, New York in May 2022, perpetrated by those who subscribe to racist, conspiratorial fears about white genocide, and who commit those acts of violence hoping that media coverage will impel others to follow their example. It's also not a criticism lessened by the fact that there are some media outlets who echo those same conspiratorial and racist fears, albeit usually in more moderate language. Those criticisms aren't new to me as a historian, because we've had these conversations before. Most particularly, we've had these conversations in the context of the Ku Klux Klan of the 1920s. It was during that decade that the Klan garnered its largest membership ever, at its height in 1924, estimated at over 4 million members. And 4 million members nationwide. The Klan had strength in the Deep South, certainly, but it had strongholds here in Texas, in Indiana, in Oregon, in Colorado. And with that huge membership, with that national reach, came power, particularly political power. The Klan elected members and sympathizers to local office, to state office, even to the United States Senate. Now, there's a kind of reassuring mantra that folks like to say today about the kind of hatred that the Klan represents, right? It's not who we are. It's un-American. That if we can expose the truth of their hate, it will simply melt away. Again, that's not a new idea. That's an idea that was popular in the 20s as well. The Klan, one newspaperman wrote, is a germ that shrivels and dies in the light of publicity. That's a lovely idea. But the example of the 1920s suggests that that simply is not true. In fact, the more attention the Klan got, the bigger it grew, even when that attention was explicitly negative. We can take an example for this, right? The New York World in 1921 printed a 3-week expose on the Klan. Front page headlines every day detailing the secrets of their organization, the ways in which they recruited, their hatreds, their links to vigilante violence, warning, fundamentally, that the Klan was an existential threat to American democracy. It was a wildly popular series, reprinted in other newspapers around the country, praised by politicians and leading thinkers, and sparking a wave of similar exposés at other publications. In fact, over the course of the 1920s, 5 newspapers, starting with the New York World, won the Pulitzer Prize for their courageous and principled anti-Klan reporting. But even as reporters celebrated the work that they were doing, the Klan was continuing to grow. And Klan leaders recognized this fact. As far as they were concerned, this wasn't Pulitzer Prize-winning reporting. This was millions of dollars worth of free advertising. To think about how badly some of this backfired. For one of their stories on how the Klan recruited its membership, the World reprinted a picture of a Klan membership application form. People cut that out of the newspaper and used it to actually join the Klan. So it is very clear from the get-go that these kinds of tactics did not work. And yet, the media doubled down. They continued to heap attention on this organization. And the Klan welcomed that fact. In fact, the Klan encouraged it. They worked hard to attract that attention, both in positive ways, through the promises of exclusive access and scoops, and in negative ways, by making controversial public statements that they knew would attract front-page headlines. Those are both tactics still used successfully by hate groups today. So, what does that mean for reporting on the Klan? Is negative reporting unhelpful? Well, an even bigger problem gets caused when, as the Klan grows, more and more publications started to think, well, maybe some of our readers are actually sympathizers. What if, by denouncing the Klan, we start to lose readers? And so they start to move towards a more avowedly neutral reporting. As one African-American newspaper commented at the time, we are convinced increasingly that the average American newspaper is dedicated to commercialism and money-getting, regardless of the cost to America or to civilization. At the same time, a group of predominantly white reporters increasingly argued that to print overtly anti-Klan reporting was a violation of journalistic ethics, that kind of openly political position should be left for the editorial page. And as such, we move towards more and more reporting that simply lays out, for example, the size and the scope of Klan events. That's a neutrality that benefits hate groups, because these events are designed to attract exactly that kind of attention. By simply saying, this Klan rally was this large and attracted this many people, it gives the impression that the group is a successful and influential organization and helps further their recruitment efforts. So if negative reporting doesn't work very well, if neutral reporting works even less well, should we simply ignore the existence of hate groups altogether? That's the question that black newspaper reporters and editors particularly debated in the 1920s, because they saw what the white mainstream press was doing as an utter failure? And the answer that the reporters during that decade came to, generally, was no. It's a vicious fallacy, they argued, to assume that any coverage of the Klan is equivalent to advertising the Klan. Comparing the organization to a fire, one newspaper wrote that it was true that if you starved the Klan of the oxygen of publicity, eventually it would burn itself out. But, like the proverbial fire, that wouldn't happen until after preventable death and destruction. As such, action had to be taken to put that fire out now. So, rather than following the example of their white counterparts, who were reporting on how large a Klan parade was, or how many attendees were at a Klan initiation, or how spectacular or picturesque, in the words of the Washington Post, a Klan rally was. Instead, black publications ran stories on parades being canceled, on donations to churches being rejected, on the scandal and infighting that dogged the organization's leadership. More effectively, though, they started to shift the story altogether. In order to report on the Klan, they increasingly focused less on the Klan and focused on those working to combat the Klan's hatreds, particularly the NAACP, but a wide range of organizations and individuals. So, for example, rather than reporting on any Klan rally in California, they would report on a rally at which a black professor addressed Klan members and denounced their bigotries to their face. They did this because they realized that making the Klan center stage is dangerous and even counterproductive. Making hate groups center stage is dangerous and even counterproductive. Instead, we need to focus on those who are combating those hatreds. In the words of Mr. Rogers, we need to focus on the helpers. Because if we, like the New York Times did a few years ago, focus on the neo-Nazis and print long articles that comment on how polite and low-key they are, that give us details about their pop culture interests and their tattoos, then we blind ourselves to the larger story of racism in the United States and pretend as though it is new or newsworthy that hate groups exist in our midst or that bigots are human beings. Of course they are. That's true whether or not they're in a white sheet or a business suit. That doesn't mean we need to give them room, because the more room we give them, the more room they will take. Room to spread those hatreds, room to spread those ideas, room to embed those philosophies of hate even more deeply than they are already. And this isn't just a message for media and the reporters. It's a message for us all to think carefully, always, about not just what stories we're telling, but whose stories we're telling, and whose stories we're not telling. When you leave here today, whose stories will you amplify? Because if we place bigots center stage, then we allow bigotry to spread. When we place bigots in focus, then we, in the words of pioneering newspaperman Chandler Owen, allow morals, truth, justice, and the vitals of society to be bartered and sold. And nothing is worth that price. Thank you.